News of the day.
Mr. Zimmerman, have you made a decision as to whether or not you want to testify in this case?
With values that never die.
There are certainly a lot of controversies or scandals brewing right now when it comes to the Obama administration.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Dealing with the federal government is not always high-tech, and it's not always user-friendly.
The stories that matter.
This is a massive escalation in the tension here in Egypt.
The issues that count.
I don't know why the media tries to make this into a sensation. We have never hidden the fact that we supply Syria with weapons.
This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
He's got the red, white, blue flying high on the farm. Semper Fi tattooed on his left arm.
Welcome, North Carolina. This is Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at World Tribune, and I am here to uphold values that will never die. Thank you for joining me for another issue of American Heartland. It's great to spend some time with you. If you do miss an episode or you want others to hear an episode that you particularly like, we have every single one archived on YouTube. And today we have lots of fascinating stories to discuss. We will address the continued gap in wage earning between men and women. We will also take a look at some bombshell testimony on Benghazi and the failure to hold anybody accountable still. We are going to examine a fascinating interview by President Assad, the Syrian president, who actually is now going to give his version of events to the American people. And before we get to all of that, we are going to take a good look at the dysfunctional situation on Capitol Hill. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. We have the banana republic of the United States of America, where nothing seems to get done. Capitol Hill is in the middle of another bruising debate on another discussion about debt and deficits, taxing and spending, and a discussion about the budget. You know, a lot of this comes from a problem that emanates right from the very top. We have a president who is simply not doing the job that the American people elected him to do. He has spent a great deal of time focusing on issues that went nowhere: gun control, immigration reform, climate change. All of these, in the first year of his re-election, resulted in one big fat zero. Instead of focusing on the budget, he knew these deadlines were coming. He's off in all kinds of different directions, half-cocked. And the most recent direction that he went astray on is that of Syria. As everybody knows, he took this country to the brink of war. He had a policy which was undisciplined, as his own defense secretaries have recently said. Leon Panetta has recently blasted him. Robert Gates has recently blasted his conduct of this whole Syria mission. And even those on the left have said that the president's manner of handling this crisis showed him to be nothing short of a fumbling idiot. And what does he say in response to the mountains of criticism that have been heaped upon him? He simply said that Washington is criticizing him based on style. Listen to this clip. Roll it, Brittany.
I think that folks here in Washington like to grade on style. Right? And so had we rolled out something that was very smooth and disciplined and linear, they would have graded it well, even if it was a disastrous policy. We know that because that's exactly how they graded the Iraq war until
so this doesn't change your view of President Bush.
No. What it says is that I'm less concerned about style points. I'm much more concerned about getting the policy right.
You know, Mr. President, you have been roundly criticized not just for the lack of discipline in the Syria basically fiasco, the Syria fiasco. You have been criticized for the substance of the policy. And the problem with the policy is you have now given the geopolitical advantage to Russia. The president promised us that if we had made some key concessions to Vladimir Putin, such as we were no longer going to have the European defense missile shield that the neighbors of Russia really desperately wanted, we were going to negotiate reductions in the nuclear arms talks, we're going to reduce our arsenal in tandem with the Russians. And if we made these concessions, Russia was going to help us in one of our key objectives in the Middle East, and that is to contain the possibility of a nuclear Iran. Well, what has the president of Russia done this week? No sooner does he have this deal that he's working on with the U.S. to try to be the key monitor in getting a hold of Assad's chemical weapons. The ink isn't even dry on that. The details haven't even been fully hashed out. And what does he do? He strikes a bargain with Iran to give them a whole shipload of weapons. What does that tell us? That tells us that Vladimir Putin is running circles around Obama. And the American press knows it. And that's why they have criticized him. His policy in the Middle East is completely incoherent. And because of that incoherence, you have somebody stepping forward, a strong man like Vladimir Putin, who is going to try to get some coherence there. He's going to do what the American powers have failed to do. And he is supporting the only possible person in Syria that can bring an end to the civil war, and that is the strongman Assad. If you look at this situation with any kind of an objective lens, you will conclude, number one, Assad poses no security threat to the United States, no immediate security threat, even if you leave all those weapons in his possession. And number two, if the policy of this government is to bring stability to Syria, which is what the president has said again and again, he said that overall objective of America is to just bring stability there, to end the fighting. Well, nobody's going to be able to bring an end to the fighting except the strongest guy in the room, which is Assad. And Putin, who also shares that interest in just bringing an end to the fighting, has figured it out that the way to get there is to support Assad. So President Obama's policy is idiotic. And it isn't only idiotic in terms of the overall geopolitical strategy, it isn't idiotic in terms of what you intend to do in Syria itself, but also it's a dangerous policy because this president has now pledged to send arms into a war zone where you have different factions there, and you have factions, a great majority of them are opposed to American national interests. They are Al-Qaeda-backed groups. And the president says that he'll be able to control who is going to receive the shipment of armaments. Really? In a war zone? You know what's really ironic about all this? It's always the Democrats who are going on and on about gun control and gun control and gun control. Gun causes so many terrible things to happen. And now what does this president want to do? He's basically talking out of two sides of his own mouth. At home, he's insisting on all this gun control. And in Syria, he wants to send shipments off, trying to get them to into the arms of one particular rebel group that is weak and embattled in an area in which you have thousands of fighters coming in from around the Middle East, whether it's Libya, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq. He wants to send a whole shipload of arms there and I guess say a Hail Mary and hope that they end up in the right hands. This policy is stupid. And it's stupid on another front too. He's basically saying to Assad, I want you to give me all your weapons. And you know what? At the same time, I'm going to supply your sworn enemies with weapons. So what? Now you imagine that you are Assad. What are you thinking? You're thinking, well, even if I'm forthright, even if I'm completely honest and I give up all my chemical weapons, I'm basically dealing with a government that wants me dead. Because if the rebels take power, what do you think they're going to do to him? They're going to kill him and his family and his entourage and everybody around him. That's how things are resolved in that part of the world. So what has Assad concluded? He has concluded, I am going to throw my fate. My life is in the hands of Vladimir Putin. And I am just going to string America along. And one of the shocking stories that the Wall Street Journal reported is that Assad has actually sent his chemical weapons from 8 sites where they were located. He has now dispersed them to 50 sites. So Assad is playing this president for a fool. He is saying on the one hand, I'm going to cooperate, I'm going to cooperate, I'm going to cooperate. And at the same time, he has authorized an elite group within his army to disperse the chemical weapons to as many different locations as possible, which means that he and Vladimir Putin have a pact. They're going to string the Americans along so that his power can be saved in Syria, so he can restore order in Syria, and he and Putin will work in tandem. Basically, Putin is now the kingmaker of that region, and Assad is playing the only card that he has. And you know, in all of this heaping criticism that has come upon the president, some folks are beginning to realize not only is he incompetent, but he is getting very, very close to being irrelevant. You're not going to believe this stunning quote on This Week with George Stephanopoulos, uttered by Matthew Dowd. Roll it, Brittany.
This whole notion that basically 2013 has come a cropper for the president. Everything he's put at the top of the agenda is stalled or failing or universal. You saw he kind of deflected it. But if you were in the White House right now, what would you tell him is the best path to salvaging this year?
Well, what's interesting is I was around a White House where at the same point in time in the presidency, in the aftermath of Katrina, where the President Bush's job approval dropped to about 43 or 44, exactly where
getting right there right now.
It's exactly where he is today. And basically you have Congress that is in a dysfunctional place, which is where it was when he was president. And that point in time, it was basically the beginning of the end of President Bush's presidency. I think the president, he's a very big fan of history, understands that. He watched that go on with the president. I think that unless the president changes the trajectory, he is on the road to irrelevancy. And that's why your last question, which went to 2016 president, which is what everybody now wants to talk about, even though there's all these huge issues, understand that this president is fast becoming irrelevant in Washington.
I think he is becoming irrelevant, not just around the world, but in Washington. And even the late night comedians such as Jay Leno are beginning to pile on. Roll it, Brittany.
Oh, boy. Hey, here's some big news. Plans are being discussed for a new reality show based on the White House. It's called Lame Duck Dynasty. You don't want to miss that.
Yeah, you know when the late night comedians start to spoof you relentlessly that you have lost the respect of the American people. And so to this president, I say clearly and unequivocally, the problem with your presidency, both at home and abroad, has nothing to do with your lack of style. It's substance, stupid. Get it right. You are listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com, and I'm here to uphold values that will never die.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
I can lift you up. I can show you what you want to see and take you where you want to be. You could be my luck. Even if the sky
Welcome back. This is Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com. I'm here to uphold values that will never die. By the way, worldtribune.com is an incredible source of news. I recommend you all sign up for the free email alerts every day in your inbox. You will receive a newsletter telling you what the top headlines are. And you're going to find stories at worldtribune.com that you won't read anywhere else. The breadth of stories on World Tribune is really staggering. It is a premier source of foreign news, and that's why I'm so proud to be a key part of it. And I think if you sign up for those newsletters, you'll see exactly what I mean. Well, you know, this week we also had a remarkable occurrence. Fox News scored a really fascinating interview with the leader of Syria, Assad himself. And I thought it was fascinating because here, for the first time, you got to see an extended, for the first time basically since this brinkmanship conflict has begun, you got to see an extended version of Assad's, of Assad's account of things, unfiltered by what the White House is saying, what the State Department is saying, what John McCain is saying, what Lindsey Graham is saying. We actually heard from the leader himself. And anybody that saw that interview had to conclude a couple of things. Number one, this man is extremely intelligent. I would say do not underestimate Assad. He's also very learned. He's very precise. He's very meticulous in the way that he talks. And often, he was really quite offended at the way that he was being interviewed because it seemed to him so many times that America was dictating to Syria what should be happening within Syria. And you could tell that he took exception to that. It is up to the Syrian people to determine their own fate. It is up to Syrian institutions to determine how things unfold there. He said that repeatedly, and it really highlighted the arrogance of the American press in the line of questioning. It highlighted the arrogance of the Obama administration in how they've talked about Syria and the Syrian people. And even more than arrogance, I think the interview showed the ignorance of so much of what has been disseminated to us. American ignorance on Syria is really staggering. So I encourage all of you, take a look at that interview on Fox News website. It's being rebroadcast in bits and pieces so you can make up your own decision about who this leader is, about who is right and wrong in the civil war, and about what America's interest should be in all of this very complex situation. You know, Assad said something which is very powerful. He said something that we as Americans should be extremely sympathetic. We should show great sympathy towards. He said that he and his country are embattled in, guess what? A war on terrorism. So from his point of view, yes, there was a rebellion that began, and there was a demand for reforms that set so much of this off 2 years ago. But subsequently, you've had a tremendous influx of fighters from the region. And he has identified them clearly for what they are. So many of these fighters who are trying to oust him are terrorists. And he's not the only one saying it. It's the Syrian people who are saying it too to the American press. That's why they're telling the Americans to be very, very cautious and actually to support the president because he's the only one fighting terrorism in all of this mess that is going on in Syria. You have fighters that are coming now from Libya, from Qatar, from Saudi Arabia, from Pakistan, and they're even coming from Iraq. Believe it or not, you have a huge influx of folks coming from Iraq. And what does that tell you? Think about it for a moment. We have spent countless amounts of dollars and we have been bled white in terms of how many men and women we have lost on the battlefield in that war. And President Obama pulled out those troops without ensuring that the gains we had made were secure, without ensuring that we had a strong cooperation with the Iraqi government. Essentially, everything we did basically fell apart under the reign of President Obama. Everything we had achieved with President Bush collapsed because of the slipshod way in which President Obama withdrew from Iraq. And what do we have now? We have thousands of Iraqi terrorists who have fled and gone to Syria, and they are the ones that Assad is fighting. So you think about the message that we're sending to him. We were fighting those terrorists in Iraq and it was okay then, but now that you're fighting them, you're the bad guy. Is this a coherent policy to you? How do you think we look to the rest of the world? And what is happening there in Syria? You now have a shocking phenomenon of a three-front war, because you have so many of these foreign terrorists, especially one group coming from Iraq. They are called ISIS, ISIS. They have launched a campaign which is called Expunging Filth. And they are fighting the other rebels. So you basically have infighting going on amongst the rebel groups itself. And it is in that situation, with Assad fighting all the rebels fighting themselves, fighting one another, various factions fighting one another, and the rebels fighting Assad, that Barack Obama wants to send arms there. That's the kind of environment he wants to send arms in. And that's the kind of environment he wants to embroil America in. That's the kind of environment, had the American people not said no in, we would have been sending bombs in and getting ourselves into a deeper and deeper hole. It is extremely shocking that the American people have been told to intervene in what is largely a religious war, that we really don't have a dog in that fight. A lot of these foreign fighters, why are they coming? They are Sunnis, and they want to erect basically a Sunni empire of sorts. And they really believe they're fighting a Sunni holy war. And they really believe, according to Islamic teaching, that they can create this larger Sunni empire. The beginning of it should be in Syria. And it is in this environment that the president wants to embroil us. I think it's giving us all gray hair. The very thought of getting involved in this sends quivers down my spine. And I think I'm getting gray hair as I speak about trying to untangle this. Now listen to Assad himself, how he is explaining what is going on. To me, it makes perfect sense when he speaks. Roll it, Brittany.
Get lost in numbers because, as you say, it's very true, a human issue here. But again, you use the figure of 90% of the opposition, the rebels, are Al-Qaeda. You stand by that, 90%.
80 to 90. No one has exact number. You don't have the exact number because they are coming, flowing irregularly.
You don't think that's too high? I mean, people are putting that lower, at least 50-50, and one would say that at least it's 50-50. You have some opposition to deal with.
Which people? I'm sure not the Syrian people. No one in Syria say they are 50-50. From abroad, maybe. They have their own estimations. But at the end, it's our conflict. We live here. It's our country. We can tell how much. But 50-50, how did they count it?
But again, just to sum up what you've been saying, in one quote you said, the opposition has been manufactured from abroad. Do you really feel that? You really feel the opposition in this country to your government has been manufactured from abroad?
It's not feeling, and it's not about how I feel. It's about what facts are presented in front of us. If they don't have Syrian grassroots, because we have oppositions in Syria that they have grassroots. Why to have opposition abroad? How do they live? Who give them money? How they are financed? And we all know that they belong to the United States and Britain and France and Qatar and Saudi Arabia. real opposition only belongs to the Syrian people. As long as it doesn't belong to its people, it's made by other countries. That's simple evidence.
Thank you.
You know, I think that clip is absolutely fascinating. And again, in another clip, you see how he is educating the reporter, and he's educating Americans about what's really going on in his country. Roll it, Brittany.
Billions dead, and frankly has left that city and many of your other great cities, like Aleppo and others, in ruins. I mean, is this the way to go after, if you think there are some terrorists out there, the terrorist enemies of your state?
So it's like if you say that when the terrorists infiltrated some area or attack certain part of any city, that the civilians would stay and live with them. That's impossible. Whenever the terrorists enter an area, the civilians would leave, unless they use them as a human shield. But in most of the cases, the civilians would quit their area because of the terrorists. And that's why you have so many refugees. So in most of the cases, the Syrian army attack area where there's no civilians living in it. In most of the cases, you can hardly find civilians with terrorists. They cannot live.
With a rough estimate, Mr. President, of the total of 110,000 dead so far is at least about 50,000 civilians. You're saying there were 50,000 human shields? You're saying that those people were in the wrong place?
First of all, what's the source of your information?
That is a breakdown by analysts who look at these numbers. You think it's lower?
Analysts from the United States, living in the United States or living around. You can only talk about facts. We cannot talk about estimations and allegations.
110,000 is a fact that everyone agrees with.
Of course, as I said, we have tens of thousands of dead. I didn't say the exact number for one reason, because we have thousands of missing people. You cannot count them as dead. They do not know that they are dead. It's a war now. So talking about the number, we have to be very precise. You're talking about the numbers as a spreadsheet without knowing that they are family. This is tragedy. We live with those people. This is a human tragedy. It's not about numbers. It's about every family in Syria lost a dear one, including my family. We lost a member of family. We lost friends. And that's why we are fighting terrorism. So should we allow the terrorists to continue without fighting them? This number, if it's close to the real number, will be so many folds, will be millions, not hundreds of thousands.
And he nailed it. If the terrorists are allowed to run roughshod in Syria, that number of dead and missing and fleeing would be much, much higher. Sadly, Mr. Assad is the only one who can restore any kind of order to Syria, and even more sadly, our government is taking the side of some of the worst terrorists on the planet Earth. You are listening to Dr. Grace, upholding values that will never die.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.
Welcome back. This is Dr. Grace, the host of American Heartland. Such a pleasure to be spending some time with you on a Saturday afternoon. I'm just sorry that so much of the news that we discuss is so gloomy. You know, another huge story this week is that the president has been trying desperately to get people to enroll in those Obamacare exchanges. And he's having a hell of a time doing it because especially the young people, they don't want to do it. The deadline for getting everybody enrolled on that is October 1st. And, you know, what do they have to do? This whole project was supposed to be about cutting costs, bringing healthcare costs down, while the administration is now spending millions of dollars in Obamacare ads. And when you hear this ad in particular, you're going to know why nobody's enrolling in these healthcare exchanges. An ad like this one isn't going to get anybody to do anything. Check out this extremely lame Obamacare ad.
We fly with our own wings, care about the same things. We stand strong together, so let me hear you sing. We fly with our own wings, dreaming all the big dreams. Long live Oregonians, we're free to be healthy. Long live Oregonians, we're free to be healthy.
what a waste of money. That ad is running in Oregon. It is pathetic. I think for most of us listening to it, you have no idea what this ad is about. Is this about some kind of rescuing animal ad? Is it some kind of, help save the birds foundation? I mean, you just hear these strange fluttering sounds. And then at the end, you realize that they're talking about Oregonians being healthy, but you're not even told exactly what this is about, what they should be doing it, why they should be doing it. I mean, this is pathetic. If this is an example of incompetence, I don't know what is. One of the really surprising things about Washington, D.C. is that we seem to be lurching lately, especially since Obama came to power. We're lurching from crisis to crisis to crisis, even on things that we know we've got to get done. We know we have to discuss the debt, and the debt limit has to be raised every year. We know we have to get a budget through. We know that we have certain liabilities that have to be paid no matter what. And what have we done since the president came to power this time around in his re-election campaign? We've discussed guns, we've discussed climate change, and we've spent a hell of a lot of time discussing immigration reform, all at the expense of what? The budget, the debt limit. Now, I ask you, I think if I ask anybody on the street, you are going to begin a new term as president, what are you going to do first? Are you going to discuss climate change first? Or are you going to discuss the budget, which you need to fund a huge public sector, which you need in order to clarify how you're going to pay off our mammoth debt, which every single person in America needs to understand where the budget is so they can make decisions for themselves about their own finances? What are you going to do first? Are you going to do the budget first, or are you going to do immigration reform first? Are you going to do the budget first, or are you going to talk about gun control first? We have our priorities all messed up. And then I ask you this, are you going to talk about the budget first, or are you going to talk about Syria, for crying out loud? And the Sunni Islamic State, we don't even know what the hell it is, where it is, what it means. It has nothing to do with our daily lives, whereas the budget does. And getting this fiscal house in order should be a top priority. And you know what? In this regard, I don't just blame the president. I blame the Republican Party, too. We know that this budget has to be passed. So why did they spend so much time on immigration reform, especially when the grassroots was telling them, we don't want it, we don't want it, we don't want it. Do something useful while you're there. So they spent all this time on an immigration reform bill that is now stalled in the Senate, and it's probably not going anywhere, which, by the way, is a godsend. But when we look at the fact that we are now again facing another financial crisis, it is outrageous. Our leaders are not doing the basics. Get the budget resolved before you do anything else. And you know what? Try something really creative. Think ahead. You have a deadline. You have to meet it. And you know what the Republicans are doing right now? The best that they can do is they've just sent a bill forward. They're going to try to get it through the Senate first. It does try to defund Obamacare. But you know the best they can do is to have a bill that funds the government for 2 months, from October 1st until December. That's the kind of leadership that we got. It's almost like saying you're going to try to make your own family budget with your husband that has a 2-month contract. And after that, well, you'll figure it out. Can you imagine trying to figure anything out based on that kind of a plan? And how can any business in America get on a solid footing with this kind of haphazard governance? Both parties are equally to blame on that. And it's causing tremendous economic uncertainty, and it's causing tremendous economic stagnation. It's also causing tremendous frustration. It hurts us not only as individuals, but also our reputation abroad. How can we instill any fear in any respect when we can't even fund our government for more than 2 months? And even that is going to be a hell of a fight going forward. Because guess what? On some issues, the president has said he's not negotiating. He doesn't want to negotiate on the debt limit increase. He says that the Congress has incurred these liabilities. They have to raise the debt limit, and he's not prepared to discuss it any further. And so we have House Speaker Boehner, who has produced an ad that is spoofing the president's unwilling to negotiate. Roll it, Brittany.
What I haven't been willing to negotiate, and I will not negotiate, is on the debt side.
I'm just going to have to reiterate, John, the president's made clear he's not going to be negotiating over the debt limit.
Look, the president's been very clear. He's not negotiating on the debt limit.
What I will not do is to have that negotiation.
Let me reiterate what our position is, and it is unequivocal. We will not negotiate with Republicans in Congress. He will certainly meet with Putin.
I did discuss this with President Putin. This is something that is not new. I've been discussing this with President Putin for some time now.
We're going to work with the Russians.
Mr. Foreign Minister, we are serious, as you are, about engaging in substantive, meaningful negotiations.
Negotiations.
We are prepared to negotiate in good faith, in mutual respect.
For decades, the White House, the Congress, have used the debt limit to find bipartisan solutions on the deficit and the debt.
You know, it occurred to me that perhaps we should ask Vladimir Putin to help us resolve this crisis. The debt limit crisis. Perhaps we should ask Secretary of State to make some kind of an off-the-cuff comment about what kind of a compromise Republicans and Democrats can achieve, and then we can ask Vladimir Putin to step in, and maybe we can ask the United Nations to help us, because we're heading in that direction. This is the banana republic of the United States of America. That's what's really going on. There is no corporation that runs its finances this way. There is no household that runs its finances this way. And yet, the greatest country in the history of the world is at a standstill again and again and again. Of course, our debt rating should be downgraded. It should be downgraded significantly because we have complete incompetence at the very center of this country. And what if, for example, House Speaker Boehner, from the moment that Obama had been elected, had said, every time Obama tried to change the conversation, he'd say, I'm sorry, sir, we have a budget crisis coming. We have to address it first. I'm sorry. And he would shame him again and again and again. What if the House leadership and the Republican House leadership and the Republican Senate were all on the same page on this? What if you had a gang of 8 from the start, not trying to do immigration reform, but fixing our budget problem from the very start, and shaming the president to ensure that a deal is done? And now here we are, another time facing brinkmanship, another time on the edge of the cliff, staring into the abyss, into the economic abyss. And it's no wonder that this economy keeps sputtering along at such low growth. You cannot have growth unless you have a solid budget. You cannot have growth unless you have laws that are known, that are consistent, and that are implemented even-handedly. Instead, at the very center of power, you have people that are off on their own pet projects. That's what you have at Capitol Hill right now. Pet projects. And not attending to the key business of the American people. And sadly, time is running out. Our fiscal problems are so severe that in a couple of years, it is highly likely that we may have riots in the street as the American government will be unable to meet its financial obligations. And Secretary of Clinton at the time, then Secretary Hillary Clinton, had said that our fiscal problems are so serious that they are harming our ability to project our power abroad. And in fact, if you notice, when we were discussing Syria, one of the sidebar set of articles that was in almost every newspaper was, well, even if we try to wage this campaign, how are we going to pay for it? Can we pay for it? Let's do the math. So it is hurting us, both in terms of our economy and in terms of our reputation abroad. Republicans and Democrats, it is time to solve these fiscal problems. Americans do it at their kitchen table, and we want you to do it in the nation's kitchen table. Get it done once and for all. You're listening to Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com, upholding values that will never die.
News of the day with values that never die.
Welcome to American Heartland with Dr. Grace. I am here to defend women too today. That's why we started this segment with that song, which, as my producer said, is a throwback. It's a girl power song. We're going to discuss the reports that have come out about the problem that women face in the workplace. Their income is still much lower than men, even though they have the same experience and they do the same job. But before we get to that, I do want to discuss Benghazi because there was some really interesting developments this week. You had a key individual that gave testimony. He is a person that is essentially, he at the time of the incident in Benghazi, he reported to Secretary of State Hillary Clinton. He is the undersecretary. His name is Patrick Kennedy, and he was grilled on the Hill this week. He was asked precisely why there hasn't been accountability for those 4 deaths that occurred just a little over a year ago. Roll it, Brittany.
We're here today because at the end of the day, no one is held accountable. And so that's contradictory to the thesis that you're advancing here. No one is held accountable.
Mr. Chairman, I respectfully disagree about the subject of accountability. 4 employees of the State Department were relieved of their senior positions as assistant secretaries or deputy assistant secretaries of state and are no longer holding those senior positions. I submit respectfully, Mr. Chairman, that accountability includes being relieved from your job and assigned to other positions. To me, that is serious accountability.
You know, the problem with that thesis is that those individuals, they never missed a paycheck. They were also then reinstated in different positions. That doesn't sound like accountability. That sounds more like a little bit of a tap on the wrist to me. And what is even more alarming is we have a new House Oversight Committee report, which states very clearly that the 4 individuals that were named in the initial ARB report as responsible for the Benghazi catastrophe, they were actually quite low on the totem pole. Basically, the new report, which has been chaired by Darrell Issa, it states that the 4 folks were really subordinates of Mr. Kennedy, and the accountability's got to go much, much higher. It has to go to this man himself, who holds a key position in the chain, and to the woman that he reported to, which was Hillary Clinton. You know, one of the shocking things is that the ARB report, the initial report, not the second one that came out this week, that report never even interviewed Hillary Clinton. Can you believe that? And we know clearly from all the digging that has been taken place, that has gone on by the press and by this congressional investigation, that Mr. Kennedy had discussions with Clinton herself about the security situation in Benghazi. So the problem with this accountability report is that the people that were held accountable so far, and so-called, they were actually quite low level. You didn't have enough of a senior, a person high up in the chain of command that has paid a price for what happened and that has given a thorough accounting even. So one of the things that has to be done is we need Hillary Clinton back before Congress to give congressional testimony based on all the new information that has come out. And one of the things, too, that has to be addressed is there were some decisions that were made that clearly were made at a level that she would have been involved with, especially revoking a security team that had been placed and that had been given to the compound for free. And that security detail of 16 men, that was yanked. And we need to know why and who ultimately made that decision. I'm betting here that that decision was made by Hillary Clinton. Also, we have another phenomenon that occurred, and that is that there was this thing called expeditionary diplomacy that took place, which is a policy of creating compounds in situations that were highly risky. Well, who made that decision? Why was that decision made? And shouldn't somebody fall on their sword for having made that decision? So far, Hillary Clinton has not taken adequate responsibility. As the mom of deceased Sean Smith has said over and over again, she has her daughter. What about my son? And she's the front runner in 2016, but a front runner who presided over one of the worst episodes in American history and has so far gone unscathed. So Mr. Kennedy was on the hot seat, and he continued essentially to stonewall and to protect his superiors. Here's another clip from that congressional testimony. Roll it, Brittany.
Well, the reassignment. No one missed a paycheck. All right. No one has been held accountable, and the board did not take this to the upper levels of management, where clearly, for those who are observing from the outside, many of these decisions were made. And indeed, that's why we're here, is in order to try to change a system in which you have a hand in suggesting who does the investigation. It would be far wiser, and this is one of the most frustrating parts about dealing with this State Department. You went 4 years without the appointment internally of an investigator that would take on this responsibility. And in this process, we go through an ARB process in which you choose who's going to do the investigation. Afterwards, you move people from one position to another. They're on the paycheck, they're on the clock, whether they're working or not, through all of this. And there's no accountability in the process from our perspective in it.
Well, that was a congressman that was grilling Mr. Kennedy, and Mr. Kennedy basically kept shielding his former boss. And essentially, unless we get Hillary Clinton on the stand, we're not going to get any further. And that is the next call to action. We want Hillary Clinton grilled again, and hopefully this time she won't tell us what difference does it make, because we see it makes a hell of a big difference to those who are still mourning their beloved, and it makes a hell of a big difference to Americans who want to ensure that really this never happens again. You know, we began the segment with that girl power song, and I'd like to hear it again before we go into this crusade of ours to try to defend women who are not being paid enough. You know, there is a report that has come out, and this essentially confirms what has been going on for decades. This is data from the Census Bureau. Women are still earning only 77 cents for every dollar that men earn. That was a study that basically scrutinized earnings in 2012. So you have women who do the same job with the same experience. Thank you, Brittany. Let's get empowered now. We got that song on. We survived nonetheless. But, you know, I got to tell you, talk about a war on women. The real war on women has nothing to do with contraception. It has to do with the fact that this is an issue that really resonates with me. It really upsets me. I'm sure, does it upset you, Brittany? This discrepancy? Yes. You know, it upsets a lot of women out there. And the sad thing is, this is an economic issue that the Republicans should be championing. Not even necessarily with legislation. You don't necessarily have to champion every cause and propose a piece of legislation, because legislation isn't going to solve this. There's something going on in the American workplace. The president, basically, he passed into law an Equal Pay Act, but it hasn't fixed the problem. So now, House Speaker, Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi is saying that they're going to launch a major new initiative. It's going to be called the Paycheck Fairness Act. So again, they think they're going to solve this with legislation. It's not about legislation. What is happening is employers are making a decision. They see a man and they see a woman. And even though the two people work the same amount of hours and have the same level of experience, many employers across America, they value the labor of a man more than they value the labor of a woman. I think we have to have a conversation about that, but not a conversation that's full of political correctness. We want to know why that is. Why? I would love to have leaders of business discuss it. When they are hiring two people, why do they make that decision? Now, some studies say part of the reason is that women are not as good at negotiating, but I don't think that explains it. And some people have said, generally women on the whole, they earn less than men, mostly because they do a lot more part-time work. But that's not a good answer to anything that we're raising right here, because we're talking about a phenomenon that affects women who are doing the same job, the same hours, the same level of experience, and yet they're earning 70 cents on the dollar. 70 cents to every dollar that a man makes. You would think that by now in 2013, that phenomenon would be long gone. But there is something going on in the American workplace where employers, and I guess many employers now are women too, women are hiring women at lower rates than they're willing to pay men. And you know what? We need to find out why. Because this is a social issue. It's not a legislative issue. I would love it if Republicans would champion it. And if they champion it, you might be surprised what happens. Republicans really struggle to get the women's vote. And they struggle to get it. They can do it without having to compromise their principles on an issue like this. Start a national conversation on it. I know Brittany and I would love it. So we hope that this is a spur in the right direction. And I would love to hear women who are hiring women and men who are hiring women to tell us why they make that decision. Is it because they think they're just going to be able to steamroll a woman? Is it because they think that women are generally just satisfied with less? Or is it because men are doing something else on the workplace that we women should know about? Are they doing something that we need to be taught in schools to do? Maybe that's what it is. So I say to all of you, open up a conversation about it. Let's write articles on it. Let's talk about it, because it'll be a huge advantage, a huge step forward to every woman in the workplace if they can at least be paid the same amount of money for the same job that a man is making. And this affects minorities even worse. Their ratio to the dollar is even lower than what white women are paid for every dollar that a man is paid. And so hopefully together, slowly, we can make inroads on finally ending this dreadful economic disparity. This is Dr. Grace, the editor of Politics and Culture at worldtribune.com, upholding values that will never die.
Well, if you ask me where I come from, here's what I tell everyone. I was born by God's dear grace in an extraordinary place where the stars and stripes.
The stories that matter, the issues that count. This is American Heartland with Dr. Grace.